Churches of Christ present Speaking the Truth in Love, a program bringing you life's answers from the Word of God.
This is Seth Parnell. I'm the minister at the Portia Church of Christ, and it's an honor to be with you today. And I hope this is a lesson that encourages you. I hope this is something that builds you up. There's a lot that we could say about family and about how important family is to us and what it means to us. Family is one of the most valuable things that you can have, on this earth. A family is someone who will support you when in good times and in bad. A family is someone who will influence you. They'll support you, and there's someone that's always there for you. We take a lot of pride. We take a lot of care to care for our family, and this is true with a physical family and a spiritual family as well. One of the best things about being a part of the Lord's church, about being part of a congregation, is that it's something that brings a family together. It's something that brings a group of people who are connected, by their faith, by a trust in God, by being born again, by the blood of Jesus Christ. And that brings these people together, and they can worship, they can praise God with all that they have, and that's something that is pretty incredible. Because to know that you're not alone, in this journey, walking down this narrow road, to know that you are not alone, but you have people to walk with you. You have people to support you, to lift you up, to encourage you. That's something that is pretty special, and that's what a family is. And so, having a spiritual family is something that it's incredibly important when it comes to being a faithful Christian. But there's many things that often bring a family together, and often calls them together and allows them to spend time with each other. One of those things that we see sometimes in the scriptures and in our daily life is the act of sharing a meal together. Now, you probably, whenever you have a family gathering, whenever you get together with your family, most oftentimes you will eventually share a meal together, because that's something that brings people together. That's something that allows them to catch up with one another and just to enjoy each other's presence and just visit with them. That's something that often brings people together, and we often do that. It's often something that is a part of our gatherings and of how we do. And it's good that we have that. That's something that's readily available. You can take a look at the scriptures and see cases in which Jesus, he shared a meal with his disciples. He went and shared a meal with a Pharisee. He was someone who, we see this scene pretty often throughout the scriptures. But for this lesson, we're going to take a look at a passage in John chapter 6, and where we read about a group of people that had found themselves in a kind of a desperate situation, in kind of a uneasy situation. But they would end up sharing a meal with Jesus, and in a very, very unexpected way. And maybe this was something that maybe they didn't expect, but it was something that they would never forget, because it would be an amazing miracle that Jesus would perform. The passage in John chapter 6 that we're going to take a look at, if you want to read along, is in John chapter 6, and we're going to begin in verse 1. John chapter 6, starting in verse 1. The scriptures say, "After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. And lifting up his eyes, then, and seeing that a large crowd was coming towards him, Jesus said to Philip, 'Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?' He said this to test him, for he knew himself what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them, to even get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, 'There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many?' Jesus said, 'Have the people sit down.' And now there was much grass in the place, and so the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. So Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, 'Gather up the leftover fragments, that nothing may be lost.' So they gathered them up, and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. And when the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, 'This is indeed the prophet who has come into the world.' Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew himself again to the mountain by himself." And so we find here in this case in John chapter 6 that Jesus and his disciples had been hard at work. They had been going here and there. They had been working for the kingdom, spreading the good news of what Jesus was all about. His being a follower of Jesus was something that was not a sideline position. It was not something that was minimal, but people who followed Jesus were at work. They were active. They were going out and spreading the good news of what Jesus had to offer. But this was something that caused the disciples to become a little weary. We read about in other accounts of this miracle that the disciples were going so fast and were so busy that they had barely had time to sit down. They had barely had time to rest, and they were beginning to get weary. It even says that they barely had any time to eat. These people were active, these people were on the move, and they were trying to spread that good news of the gospel. There's a passage that we read in Mark chapter 6 in verses 30 through 31. It says, "The apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, 'Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while, for many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat.'" Because they were going so hard and being so active, it says that they did not have any leisure even to eat. And so Jesus said, "Come to a desolate place and rest. Come to a place and to kind of recharge and kind of regroup." This was something that we all need every once in a while. Sometimes we just need to rest, to refocus, to regroup, and to just get recharged after a busy day. After sometimes you may have a busy week at work, or maybe just a busy day, and you just need to regroup and recharge. And that's what these disciples were going to do. Jesus said, "Come to a desolate place, and we're going to get ourselves together." But as they went, it says that a large crowd followed him, and people were still wanting to hear what Jesus had to say. It says a large crowd followed them out into this desolate place. This was a wilderness. Basically, it was the middle of nowhere. This was not a place where a nearby town was or a city, but this was just way out in the middle of nowhere. And there was nowhere to go and buy supplies. There's nowhere to go and find an inn in which to stay. But this was out in the middle of nowhere. And so, yet these people were so enamored with what Jesus had to say and the miracles that he performed that this didn't deter them, but they were willing to go out and follow Jesus so they could hear what he had to say. Jesus was someone who he taught with authority. He taught in a way that people had never heard. They were often exposed to teaching of the law from the spiritual leaders, people that we refer to as the Pharisees. The Pharisees and the scribes, these were often people who taught Israel and instructed them on the law. Basically, preachers or Bible teachers of that time, and they were used to the teaching that they got from those individuals. But yet Jesus was something different. When they heard Jesus speak, it was something that was totally different from what they had heard before. These people, Jesus was someone who spoke with authority. He was someone who spoke in a way that was quite different from what they had heard before. Jesus had a different message to give. He was there to fulfill the law that had been given to them. And oftentimes what he had to say was something that people took pretty seriously. And he was not someone who was teaching in order to fit in, but he was teaching to change the world and to change the perspective in which they had. And so what he did was something that magnetized people to him, that brought people to him. That also combined with the miracles that he performed. Jesus was someone who often had compassion on people. He cared for people in a very big way. People would bring their sick, their injured to him, and he would heal them. He would heal them of their infirmities, of their diseases, and they would be restored to a full bill of health. And seeing these miracles and seeing this care that he had for the people was something that drew these people to the middle of nowhere. And so after maybe a long session of teaching and instructing, it becomes apparent that these people are out in the middle of nowhere and they have no food to eat. They have nothing to give them the strength to make that journey home. They're kind of in a desperate situation. And so Jesus poses a question to one of his disciples. He poses a question to a man by the name of Philip. And he asks Philip, where can we go that we may buy bread for these people? And this was, as we later will find out, this was a very large crowd. It wasn't just a handful of people, but this was a very large crowd, numbering over 5,000 people, a pretty good amount of people. And so Jesus asks Philip, he says, where can we go to get bread for these people? Philip is someone who was pretty sharp, and so he said, well, maybe 200 denarius of bread would not even scratch the surface of what we need to serve people of this magnitude, to serve a number of people this big. And that's it, which was quite a lot of money. 200 denarius was about 6 months worth of wages for the average worker at that time. So half a year's income would not even scratch the surface of needing to feed all these people. And another account, in the account that Luke gives to us, and this is one of the only miracles that we find that is recorded in all 4 of the Gospels. And in Luke's account, Jesus actually challenges his disciples. He challenges his followers and says, you go find them something to eat. You go find them a bread to eat. And of course, this to them seemed like an impossible task, because how could you feed so many people? But Jesus doesn't marvel at the scope of this task. He knew what he was going to do. He doesn't panic at the idea of trying to provide for all these people, but yet he was someone that knew exactly what he was going to do. And so a man by the name of Andrew, he comes and he brings something to Jesus. He says, I found a lad who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, and this is all that I have, Jesus. Which, on the surface, is something that sounds kind of ridiculous. I mean, what is 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish to feed so many people? That may work for one person, but what about all the rest? On the surface, this seems like something that is a ridiculous notion. But yet, Jesus doesn't say that. He doesn't say that this is something that is worthless. He doesn't say that this is ridiculous. But yet, Jesus, he makes his disciples organize the people. He organizes them into groups of 50s, and so that the food could be distributed to them. And so Jesus, he blesses the food, and they begin to go and pass it out. And they pass out this food, and some of the disciples probably thought, well, this is not going to take very long. This is going to be a pretty easy task, because this is just a little bit of food for so many people. But yet, each time they came back, to Jesus, they had more. They brought more out, and this continued until they fed the entire crowd. The entire crowd of over 5,000 people were fed by this small meal that was given to Jesus, and not just a little bit. These people they didn't just get a morsel of bread, just a tiny bit, but they were able to eat till they were satisfied. They had all they wanted, and there was plenty left over. The scriptures say that baskets full of fragments were left of what Jesus had made. He was able to feed 5,000 people with just this small meal. It was an amazing effect. And we find at the end of this passage that this had such an amazing and profound effect on the men of this area that they wanted to make Jesus their king. They wanted to make Jesus their ruler because of the amazing thing that they had just witnessed. It was a day that these people would likely never forget in all of their time. They would never forget what this man had did for them. And so they were amazed at what had happened. But we know that miracles are something that when someone performs a miracle, when they perform a sign, this is something that proves who this person is. It proves the authenticity of the messenger. When someone was able to perform a miracle, it meant that God was behind them, that God was someone who was the author of their message. And it's interesting to note that John, he says that this took place near the time of the Passover. If we remember what the Passover is, back in the book of Exodus, you remember that the nation of Israel was a group of people that were in bondage. They were in slavery. They had found themselves for a period of over 400 years. They had been in a situation that had seen them build cities that they would never live in and do hard work for the Egyptians that was pretty severe. They were mistreated and treated harshly for what they were doing. And so they cry out to God. They pray to God, and they cry out to Him to deliver them from this situation. And so God sends them a man by the name of Moses, who was born in Egypt, but eventually it has to flee. But he returns and comes back to deliver his people. He comes back and he goes to Pharaoh and he says, this is what God says. Let my people go. I want my people to travel to a land that is flowing with milk and honey, one that they are going to inherit. But Pharaoh wasn't so keen on this idea. He didn't jump at this idea of just letting these people go. And so it took 10 plagues in order to convince Pharaoh that God was behind this and that he would not be stopped. And so the last of these plagues was, of course, the death of the firstborn. And as the angel passed over the camp, or the city, the Israelites were given instructions on what to do in order to avoid this. And so the feast of the Passover was born. And it was often associated with the exodus of leaving Egypt. And after they left Egypt, God fed this group of people with manna, with bread from heaven. And so it's interesting that God provided these people with manna, with bread from heaven. And here Jesus provides Israel with bread as well. He's someone who provided them with this, and proving that he is the Son of God. He is someone who has the message of God at his back. But I want to take a look at Andrew, and if you look at the story from his perspective, he comes and he brings these 5 loaves to Jesus, and these 5 loaves and fish, and he could have easily said, this is not enough. This is he could have dismissed this lad and say, you go and eat your meal. This is not going to make a difference. This is too small. But instead, Andrew said, Jesus needs to see this. He needs to take a look at this. And so even though many would have thought this was a meaningless gesture, Andrew knew Jesus could do some great things with this. And it would open the door for 5,000 people in order to be fed. Have you ever thought that when you look at yourself, have you ever thought that what you bring to Jesus, what you offer God, is something so small that it's not worthwhile, that it never makes a difference, that it's inconsequential? Have you ever thought that the talents and the abilities that you have to bring to God is something that is so small that it's never going to make a difference, that it's almost not worth the effort? Do you ever feel overwhelmed by trying to be holy and trying to be right with God and doing good works for God? I think we've all at times felt like our actions are meaningless, that our actions are inconsequential, and that nothing that we do really makes a difference. But we have to remember, when we take a look at the story, that Jesus can make the biggest impact with the smallest contributions. With the smallest things that are given to him, Jesus can do some amazing things. There's a passage that we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verses 26 and through 29. And this is what Paul has to say. He says, "Consider your own call, brothers and sisters. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, things that are not, to reduce to nothing things that are, so that no one might boast in the presence of God." You have to realize that what you bring before God, you may be small, but Jesus can do some great things with what you bring to him. And so we need to serve God where we are, and not from a place where we will be in the future. But what you have, the abilities that you have, the skills that you have, the talents that you have, you can serve God in a big way. You don't have to be a preacher. You don't have to be someone who is a song leader, but you can serve God where you are, and in a very big way, because Jesus can give an increase. And so we can see that he had compassion on these people. Jesus did, and he was able to multiply what was given to him. But if Andrew had never brought that meal, then Jesus may not have performed that miracle. And so if Jesus is going to make a difference in your life, you have to come to him, and you have to bring yourself to him so he can use you in a big way. There's a passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and verses 6 through 9 that says, "I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth." Paul said, I may have planted a seed, someone else who may have watered, but it's God who gives the increase. He's the one who gives us what we need. He's the one who provides the goodness and the prosperity that comes from our actions. And so never feel that you're not good enough to come to God, that you're not good enough to serve God, because God can use you. He can be someone that can use you maybe to reach someone that no one else can. He can someone that can give the increase in this situation. We read about people such as the Pharisees who they thought that they had it all figured out. They were someone who were expected to be spiritual people, and they thought that they had it figured out. But yet Jesus, he had some pretty harsh words for the Pharisees, and because while their actions maybe on the surface were serving God, their heart was far from Him, and they didn't have what they needed, and so they were very far away, and so they needed to make a change. Psalm chapter 138, a passage in the Old Testament, verse 6, it says, "For though the Lord is high, He regards the lowly, but the haughty He knows from afar." And so we can see that Matthew, he was a tax collector. Rahab, he was a prostitute. David, was a murderer. But yet these people turned back to God, and He was able to use them. And so God can use you no matter what your past, no matter the mistakes that you have made in the past. God can still use you if you come to Him. Romans chapter 10 and verse 9 says, "If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised Him from the dead, you will be saved." Likewise, 1 Peter 3 and verse 21 says, "Baptism, which corresponds to this, now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ." And so I hope that this lesson has been encouraging to you, and I hope this has lifted you up.
If you have a Bible question, would like to receive a free Bible correspondence course, would like a copy of 2 free books, Why I'm a Member of the Church of Christ, and Basic Bible Lessons, please contact the Nettleton Church of Christ. Speaking the Truth in Love can be viewed online. Speaking the Truth in Love is brought to you by these area churches of Christ.